With the threat of teachers' unions around the country calling for a shutdown of in person classes and a return to virtual schools, we thought it would be a great time to revisit this disaster of education policy. We get into what failed last time, and more importantly, we discuss whether there are any solutions. If you like what you're hearing from us, please hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss an episode. Visit our website at rationaleducator.com for resources on education alternatives. Here's the episode. On this episode of The Rational Educator, we are going to talk about the return to the classroom that is being interrupted by teachers who are threatening to shut down the classrooms and return to virtual learning. Now, virtual learning was an experiment in video conferencing to replace the classroom that was initiated due to school closures because of the pandemic. And now, with the rise of a new strain of the coronavirus, teachers are threatening, and particularly teachers' unions are threatening to shut down the classroom and return to virtual learning again. We have seen the Chicago Teachers Union, and it wouldn't be surprising to see other teachers' unions take up the mantle. But if the question is whether distance learning, virtual learning is a viable option for as a replacement for schools, we have some evidence that it didn't quite work out so well. And I want to toss it to our education expert, Dr. Deanna Heikkinen, to talk about what we're calling the disaster of virtual learning.
Yeah, so the experiment in 2020 didn't go so well, and in 2019 definitely didn't go so well. And what teachers, so just to give you a little bit of my background, I started teaching online in 2007. So I was a really early adopter to online education for colleges, and I spent almost 15 years working to better my own classes, to train teachers at conferences and professional development opportunities throughout the state on, district, campus, and state level, to train them to have a better course and to be better at it. And the one takeaway from the very first time that I built a course is that you cannot try to do what you do in the classroom online. It does not work. And so that's the first mistake, that the teachers were trying to just sit with their little faces like we are right now on a Zoom. They're trying to sit with their faces talking to the students, and you cannot do that, particularly with little kids. I mean, we're talking kindergarten, first, second, third grade. Wiggle worms, rightfully so. They should be wanting to, engage in the world and have this sort of socialization. This is where they're learning a lot of these skills, how to interact with people, how to read body language, facial expressions, all of these things. And this was all denied to them. And a big breakdown was just they were trying to replicate the classroom online and then send packets of homework that they would just expect the parents to work with, instead of having the students there in the classroom where they could work on, say, math worksheets, and they could walk around the room and they could help them with the problems and what normally happens in a classroom. You cannot do that online the way that it was done. And so that's the first breakdown. And then this year in 2022, at the very beginning of school, a lot of districts in the Midwest and even the Northeast, they were closed for the first week, and even some up until as late as right now, January 17th, although that may be extended. And it's not because they're doing what the Chicago teachers unions are doing, where they're trying to say, we're just going to shut down like we did before. They didn't have staffing. They're arguing that they don't have staffing because of the spread of COVID, once again, with Omicron. And so that's their argument of why they're now they're not shutting there was one school district, and I can't remember where they just shut down, but they're not shutting down completely. They're going back to virtual learning for the first week or first 2 weeks of school. And even Los Angeles is considering this because of the rise in cases in the county. And in the case of Los Angeles, what I read is that it's not because they have so many staffers calling out, it's because the rise of cases. And there are some places that are doing it just based on numbers, as opposed to other places where they're saying, look, we have too many staff calling out, we can't open the school. We just don't have the bodies to do that. So it is an issue. And then, going back to virtual learning, it is destructive to the learning environment. The kids aren't getting what they need. We've seen test scores go down. We've seen parents pulling their kids out of schools in droves because of this virtual learning, and their kids just not doing well, emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually in terms of academics. So that's kind of where we are at the beginning of 2022. As my dad would have said, we'll just hide and watch and see what happens. But I'm not really optimistic at this point with the prevalence of schools saying we don't have staffing. We're going to go back to virtual. So we'll see what happens.
What are some of the stories that we've been hearing about students that are going through this process?
I was hired as a tutor to work with students who were in virtual learning. So in one case, I went to the house where the student was on Zoom meetings, and they were like one hour on, 1 hour off, 1 hour on, 1 hour off. And so I would go there for a few hours, a few days a week, and just sit next to him and make sure that while the Zoom was going on, he was, engaging and focusing. And then when it was off, I would help him with his homework or different projects. Basically, and he was a middle schooler. He doesn't need a babysitter, but because the education was so bad, and I sat there and I saw what was happening, how they were doing this. And again, it's anecdotal, it's one school, but this is from what I understand was happening everywhere. It was really, really sad to see this bright kid become very disinterested in school because of this experience.
What do you think was the cause of the disinterest? Was it just simply the lack of engagement with a teacher, a structured learning environment, a separation from a live classroom? Like, what caused that student to disengage?
Well, it was what the teacher was having the students do was so, it was just so bad. For instance, in science, they would have these activities. They would have to go into like this science while they were all in class together instead of her lecturing. It was just so weird. And then in math class, there was this math quiz, and it was based on how fast they answered. And then they would be like ranked. It was like a quiz show, and it was really stressful. And so I started helping him a little bit, and he got like the top one day, and he was so excited. But for the most part, he was always, because he's like, I can't think that fast. And it was really stressful, and it's, to me, it wasn't teaching math problems. It was teaching them to guess on the multiple choice answers the fastest. And this is the kind of stuff that was happening.
So let me jump in here for a second and be a pain in the rear end. Uninterest is the word. Disinterest means, I have no vested interest in something.
Yeah, and he was uninterested. Thank you, Andy.
Or anti-interested.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's the writer in me,
I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
I was just rambling.
Okay. But I just want to say, I've been teaching in the classroom for 40 years and online, right around the time you started, Deanna, in 2006. And online has its virtues in that, you can reach people all over the world that you wouldn't be able to reach in a brick and mortar setting. But, as far as pedagogical efficacy, no. If somebody's a good classroom teacher, and if I can pat myself on the back, I am, if you don't mind the conceitedness here. If somebody is a good classroom teacher, that can't be replicated online, and so I think, so I've been teaching a lot online, obviously, the last few years, and the students just don't, there's just no way to give the students as much as you can in the classroom. So academically, it's just not as good. The only virtue of it, I would say, the other virtue, the positive virtue of being able to reach people all over the world with the online setting, but the other virtue, which may be a negative one academically, is as we pointed out, parents got to see what goes on in the schools, and they've been up in arms over the last year or two. And I think the more that the public schools teach online, the more the parents are going to realize that some drastic measures are going to need to be taken in order to improve the educational situation. And I always want to point out, last point I make, I always want to point out, I think there's still, the public school system is vast. I think there's still good classroom teachers there who really care about teaching, who care about the kids. So I don't want to sound like I'm knocking all the teachers. I think a lot of them are not very good and not well trained, but I think a lot of them are still good. Teachers unions, I think, are venomous. But a lot of the individual, classroom teachers, I think, are still good, still care about the kids, still want, smuggle in phonics when they'll teach American history when, rather than some weak stew known as social studies, they'll smuggle stuff in. But in many cases, they have to fight against the administration, they have to fight against the school boards and everything. And we discussed that in an earlier show. They get burned out. I don't want to sound like I'm really negative about the individual teachers. I think a lot of them still care, about teaching and care about the kids, and good classroom teachers. Those are the ones I think that probably get burned out, quit, either leave the profession altogether, or the good news is they start with what are known today as micro schools with some of the disgruntled parents. I think we discussed that, just recently. But anyway, online learning is not as effective as in-class learning.
Having the kids at home and having the parents be able to watch over their shoulders as they're receiving instruction from a teacher on the screen has really opened the eyes of a lot of parents who are shocked to find that not only are their kids not learning anything, they're also learning horrible things. And so there is a perverse value to that. It is, if you'll forgive the characterization, it is a great unmasking of what's going on in education.
Yes.
But the medium itself is still destructive as the teachers are using it, particularly in the public school setting, but private schools have been doing this as well. They are trying to replicate the classroom in this virtual environment. And to do that is worse than doing nothing. And we've seen that in a lot of the kids that we've interacted with, and I know Deanna has.
Yeah, absolutely.
But can you speak to the negative consequences? It's worse than doing nothing.
It is, because if kids were just home, they could at least go read a book. They could watch some YouTube videos on a subject they were interested. They could do these kind of deep dives the way that homeschool kids do. They could go into Khan Academy and learn some math. Maybe Khan Academy actually is expanded. They have some great art history videos and things like that as well. And so I think it would even be better to just have a kid sit down with, reading a classic book, maybe, like Swiss Family Robinson or something, and, having a dictionary next to them and learning vocabulary as they go through, or even Harry Potter. Helping a kid right now, he's reading Harry Potter and we're picking out words that he doesn't know. And the more you go through and the books get a little more, they get longer and more advanced, the vocabulary is really pretty impressive. And so we're picking out different words for him to define and, use in an assignment. And so that's a great way. That's a better way for them to learn English, reading and English, what they call language arts now, is to read a book and then maybe learn how to diagram sentences to understand grammar and pick out sentences from a book. That's a better exercise than what I saw they were getting.
And the reason that this is worse than doing nothing is that by requiring the child to go through this 5 or 6 hour day of doing busy work. Now, I understand that it's not completely 6 hours in front of a computer, but to require a child spend that much time in front of the computer in order to be compliant with the rules, you are creating an environment where the kid is just going to hate the process of learning. And
It's really true. And I'm glad that you mentioned compliance, because what the districts were doing, it was saying you have to have this many contact hours for us to get paid and for you to get paid. And so the teachers had to work so many hours, even in virtual school. So basically, you were logging hours and the kids had to log hours. And if kids didn't sign in, the parents would get a phone call. So if the internet went down at the house, or there was a problem with the computer, or the kid just literally had a meltdown, which I heard was happening with some first and second graders. Like personally, I heard parents talking about this, and they're like, no, it's okay, go read a book, go watch a documentary, do something else. The school would call and be like, this is a problem, they've got to be on,
yeah, the
because it's a
financial,
dollars game.
yeah, the financial incentives are aligned in order to create a system that will destroy the child's love of learning.
And Dr. Andy had a good point where, he's been teaching online for a long time as well. But both of us, we taught on the college level. So we taught adults, and teaching using that modality for, at least elementary, middle school is going to be an issue, because of the like sort of the intellectual capacity, where the natural course of the human brain, expanding, and how you learn and how you understand things. The virtual world is not good for that. And so it's problematic in a lot of ways, not just that the teachers weren't properly trained. I was a distance education coordinator, and I trained professors on how to teach online, how to transition a class into an online format. And these teachers, they were pushed in there. And I've always said, I feel bad for those teachers. It was a really horrible situation to be thrust into with no preparation. So I've always, just said, this is really bad. It's not just bad for the students, it's bad for the teachers.
And there's also, I'm sorry, Deanna.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, and that's why we've seen so many teachers walk away. Also, Dr. Andy's talked about in previous episodes about micro schools and how they've transitioned out of the system, which again is, an unintended good consequence, you could argue.
Right. And then there's the propaganda factor. We know the schools propagandize a great deal, and we've seen the parents object to it. It's all across the country. There's objections to various aspects of critical race theory, things like that. And if the kid is forced to be, online for hours, he's going to get, I don't know how much learning he's going to do, but he's going to get some measure of propaganda, as opposed to, as you were saying, Dr. D, if he could just opt out of the system and read a book, or, study math at the Khan Academy, or, go up on the, on the Nature Channel and watch all kinds of, stuff about, all animals and plant life all over the world. There's all different, all different things that are very educational, for a kid, and he won't get nearly as much propaganda, maybe none at all. So,
and he won't get busy work with worksheets all day, which don't do much. Maybe in math, doing the repetition of problems is really important, but in a lot of other field disciplines, you don't need to just do busy work worksheets.
Well, the worksheets are obviously there to provide a system of measurement, progress measurement for the teachers to show the administrators.
Yes,
so it's not
for the two students.
Yeah, it's not about learning. It's about compliance and the for the benefit of the administrators. But I think
another point, if I can say, another point I wanted to make is that you're talking about the parents seeing what the kids were learning. There were districts that outright sent letters to parents saying, you cannot watch your kid. It is a violation of our ruling. And they tried to do like FERPA and like push all these things. And they're like, you cannot see the other kid. Like, you can't watch the Zoom. This is not allowed. And that, when there were districts all across the country that were doing that, because parents started pushing back and like, whoa, what are you giving to my kid?
Yeah, well, the one question was the one gigantic question that emerges from that, Dr. D, is what are you trying to hide?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, that's the unintended consequence of that enforcement, is that that they pushed too hard. They overplayed their hand. So now parents, if they were to move slowly, if they were able to propagandize at a slower rate or to hide their agenda and their curricula at a slower pace, parents wouldn't have caught on as quickly as they did. And now, even if you're a parent who might agree with kind of a woke perspective, to see the results in your own children and to have it thrown in your face brazenly is a shock. And so naturally there'll be a pushback to the shock. But now, before we end our episode, I do want to make it very clear here that the technology is not what's at fault. It's the implementation of the traditional classroom pedagogies within this virtual environment. And we have two people here in our expert panel that have a lot of experience teaching using the video conferencing tools, but in a one-on-one, very measured and very interactive and more importantly, brief period of time. You're not trying to replicate a 30 student classroom in a video conferencing call. You are dealing with a student and interacting with them and leading them through a process of discovery and then sending them on their way. So you're not trying to make them learn as they're on the call. You understand that the real learning is going to take place when they get off the call and go down their own rabbit holes.
And also, I don't know about you, Dr. Andy, the youngest student that I'm working with right now is a middle schooler on a virtual tutoring Zoom. And it's, it's working out well. And I also have high school students that I've worked with. But I think if you get younger kids than that, even trying to do private tutoring, very focused with a one student, it would be difficult on a, maybe you could do 20, 30 minutes, but not a full hour, because of attention span and focus and things like that. So I think there is a use for the modality. And I think online learning for college students can really be helpful. I had students in my classes who were overseas in military, and they were able to continue taking some classes. I had single moms who, had small children at home, but they were able to take classes because they could do them online after they put their kids down at night. Because a lot of the that type of learning is asynchronous. You're not on a Zoom call with your students. You do a lot of pre-recorded and you do a lot of asynchronous work in traditional online classes for adults. And that's not how it was done. Just another unintended consequence that I was thinking about is that there are several cases across the country, particularly on the West Coast, of a student having a particular something in the background, a flag of a particular unpopular president within academia or academics, and being booted off the call. The teacher kicked the student out.
The teachers
and so that happened a few times also.
That's right. Well, I'll go back to the propagandistic
right.
aspect here of schooling. But, there's a way when you use the adjective perverse, Joel, and I think that's an apt term. There's a perverse way. I hope the teachers unions do clamor to go back, to online, because I'm not sure generally, well, we know what the scores look like. Generally, the public schools are not doing a good job of educating, period. There's some exceptions, some school districts better than others, still some good classroom teachers. But as a general rule across the country, the test scores don't lie. The international tests, the domestic tests, and it's always the same year after year after year. It's the same dreary outcomes. Either flat line at a very low level, or sometimes the scores even go down. So even in the classroom, I don't think the schools are generally doing a good job. Online's even worse. But the perverse, as you said, Joel, the perverse virtue of the online is the parents can watch. How are the schools going to prevent the parents from from watching. They could clamor about, you can't watch. But, for the parents, I think that should make them even more suspicious, and want to watch, all the more. And I think it'll help in the long run. I think the online, the weakness of it, the weakness of online learning in this context, especially for the younger kids, like Dr. D said, I think will have beneficial consequences, because I think more and more parents are going to stand up, speak out, be disgruntled, maybe opt out of the system for homeschooling, or opt out with a disgruntled teacher, and form a micro school or a small community school. And I think that is the wave of the future to improve education in this country. And in that perverse way, I think the teachers union clamoring to go online and get away from on-site teaching, I think is going to contribute positively to that.
Well, we had the bizarre spectacle of parents suddenly having to stay at home and monitor their children as they go through the virtual schools. We started that in March of 2020, and then over the course of the next few months, the parents came to believe that they were homeschooling. That's what they thought. But it's just to make it very clear here, there is a huge difference between these virtual. It's really, it's not even accurate to call them virtual learning. These are conference calls. They're chaotic conference calls, and they're not homeschooling. And the biggest difference between these virtual schools and the homeschool process is, once again, the virtual schools were trying to replicate the classroom through a video conferencing call, and homeschooling doesn't take that many hours and allows for the child to go off on a voyage of discovery, independent of the teacher. So that's
and the parent also has full autonomy on what the kid is learning.
Right. And it's important to make that distinction so that we don't confuse what's happening with these institutionalized schools versus a dedicated homeschool parent who's guiding their child. And that's where we should leave it. Make that distinction and know that if this is where your school is headed, then you're going to want to make a choice about what direction your child should go. If this is your child's future, it's not going to be pretty.
Absolutely. I mean, we didn't even really get into the social emotional issues that came out of what's happened in the last almost 2 years. The number of suicides in even like younger age groups, the number of kids on drugs in even younger age groups as a result of their social and emotional issues from this type of schooling.
The rise in anxiety and depression, the isolation is a part of that, but also the isolation in front of a video screen and the busy work and just the whole futility of it all has got to, wreak havoc on a child's mind.
I'd urge everybody, parents, everybody, to go. I mention this all the time. You watch or rewatch the movie, the Marva Collins story, with Cicely Tyson and Morgan Freeman, because it makes you realize what could happen in a micro school or in a small community school. The way education could just take off. Now, Marva Collins is extraordinary. She was just extraordinary. That's hard to replicate. But, my point here is you don't have to be Michael Jordan to be a really good basketball player. Similarly, you don't have to be Marva Collins to be a really good teacher. And you can have, very good teachers in somebody's basement with, 4 families, and teaching is much better. You don't have to deal with the bureaucracy, in the schools. The states place far fewer obstacles in the path of a certified teacher starting a school than parents starting a school, to teach other families' kids. So I think the Marva Collins is a great movie, very inspiring, true story, and I think it shows what the future of education in this country can and ought to be.
All right. Well, that is a great positive way to leave this episode. And once again, thanks to our learned panel, Doctors Bernstein and Heikkinen. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Joel. Thank you.